Hello everybody. Today I'm going to be going into some of the aspects of Flowcode 11 for driving graphical displays. So here you can see I've got the start of a new project where I've added a graphical display and I've set it up with various things like the pin connections to drive the display. I've provided a font which I've selected as Arial 32. I've set the orientation of the display, so I've set the physical orientation down here, and then I've just got a very simple program that initializes, sets my software orientation to match the physical one, and then I've got a dead simple hello world message that's printed to the display. Now if I turn on my camera, you can see we have some hardware, and you can see that we have the hello world printed on the screen. So we have the basics for driving the display. Now you can see if I look at my hello world that at the moment we're defining the X and the Y of the top left of our print statement. And that's great. And for simple displays this works really well. The problem is when you want to have something that looks nice and you want to have something that has a few things going on, then very quickly this becomes unworkable. So to my project I'm going to add a few things. I'm going to go into component libraries, display plugins, and I'm going to add a display manager. Now the display manager will automatically create me a scene, which can be seen here. If I click on the display manager, then you can see it has a graphical display and it's automatically linked itself with the ILI 9488. I just did it again and it's drawn the connection. I'm not sure why it didn't draw the connection to begin with. So you can see that the two components are connected to each other. We can also specify things like the number of scenes and whether display creator is enabled. So by default it is enabled. We're allowing callbacks and we have a scene count of 1. And that's created me this scene here called scene 0. If I go to my panels tab of my project explorer, then I can rename the scene. So I can call this screen 1 or screen 0, sorry, home. And you can see down here our reference to the panel scene has changed to screen 0 home. I could do things like change the background colour, so let's give it a bit more of a nicer colour. That has done it on a global basis, so if we were to make more scenes they would then have that new colour, but it hasn't overridden the scene that's already created. So to do that we click on a blank area of this scene and we override the scene colour here as well. There we go. So now I have a scene. I can start to add objects to that scene. So what I want is a text box. So if I go back to display plugins, let's add a rounded rectangle. Let's drag that around a bit. Let's add some text to our rectangle. So you can see we can select the font here, and this is the font that's defined by the display. So if we had different fonts defined here, then we would be able to select which one we want. So let's type in our hello world. There we go. And let's change our program slightly. So instead of printing out hello world at some specific coordinates, what we're instead going to do is we're going to initialize the display manager after we've initialized our display, and then we're going to draw scene, and the scene index is 0, and we can see that from here. Scene 0 is our screen 0 home. So if we simulate that, you can see we've got the background color, we've got the rounded rectangle, we've got the hello world. Let's also add in a counter. So there I just copy and pasted the object, and let's initialize this to the value of 0. Let's have a simple loop in our program. Let's have a calculation, and inside this calculation we will simply have a count variable, and we will increment that count variable. Here you can see in our Components tab of our Project Explorer, here is the scene of Screen 0 Home, and here are the objects that are inside it. You see at the moment they don't have very descriptive names, so let's rename these, shall we? So if we select the top one, let's have that as our title, and let's have this one as our count value. So now you can see we have better names over here, and it's much more obvious to see what's going on. So if we open up count value, and in here we want to simply set text number, and we'll set that to be count, and we don't want a unit string, so we're just going to leave that as blank. Then we'll add a small delay, and so every 100 milliseconds we're going to redraw our display with a new count value. And so if I run this, you can see there it goes in the simulation. So if I compile this to the chip, let's see how the chip gets on with this program. You can see that already things are better from where they used to be. If you've used the graphical displays before, if you were simply printing a number in the same coordinate space, you would have to make a string with the value of that number and then add some spaces to the end of that string in order to clear any remaining characters. So if you rolled over from 255 to 0 in a byte count, it would print 055 if you weren't careful about clearing the remaining characters. So let's open up our camera. You can see there it is, counting away. And then the lovely thing about this is it maintains this whole area for you. So whenever we print a value to this area, then any extra characters are taken care of for us. So let's see, when this gets to 255, let's see what happens with the 0. And there, instantly all managed for us. Now obviously we can do other things, so we can do things like alignment, so we can say, is it at the left, is it at the right, and we can also have the vertical alignment, so is it at the top, is it at the bottom. Now the next thing that's useful here is the use of buttons. So if you've got a touch enabled display, then button management is quite a useful thing to be able to do. So let's, instead of having an automatic increment, let's have a manual one. So let's copy and paste this again, and this time this will be our button. Now to make it touchable, all we have to do is inside the item properties, we've got this property that says touchable. So I'm going to set that to yes. You can see that a touchable item looks slightly different in that we have a highlight, and so you can see with and without the highlight. I think it's a little bit hard to see with the grid. Let's get rid of the grid temporarily. It's not being massively up. Ah, there we go. There we go. So there, you can see there's an obvious difference now. So we've got this drop shadow to show which ones are buttons and which ones aren't. Obviously we could give things different colours if we wanted. But let's keep with the standard for now. If we wanted to set the background colour of all objects, you could highlight multiple objects and do things like changing the colour there. So here we have our button. We've set it to be touchable, we've given it a highlight. We're going to use a callback. So you can see here in the display manager we have callbacks enabled. And what this does is it allows the display manager to handle the touches for us, and it checks for the various touches based on the scene that we're in. So if we go back to our button and we say use callback yes, and we then assign a new macro. It's just the default name for it, but we can call this anything we like, so button pressed. And you can see that this macro has a handle variable, and this is the handle of the button that's been pressed. So if we go into the macro and if we have a decision, and all we would do is to check if the handle is equal to the button. And if it is, then we know that it's this specific button that's being pressed. And so let's move our count plus plus into there, and let's also move our drawn number into here. Now to action the touch, we have to do a few things. So let's have a look here. So I think we need to add a touch component. Okay, which is under displays. Sorry, display plugins, and then we have some touch components here. So it's touchscreen FT6X06 I'm using at the moment. And again, we link this to our display. Let's quickly set up the properties. So it's on SDA is on B16, SCL is on B15, and that all looks good. So let's initialize our touch sensor. Let's set the orientation of our touch sensor. That is also 3. Then inside our loop, we need to check to see if something is being touched. So we'll sample our sensor. So it returns 0 for no touch, or not 0 for a valid touch. So let's store this into a byte variable, is touched. So if is touched, then read the coordinates. So I want the x and y coordinate. So 0 is x. We want the first touch index, and let's create some variables to store those touches into. So we want X and Y. X. Y. So now we have a touch. We've read the coordinates of that touch. We now need to pass that to our display manager to check to see if those coordinates are over a button. So what we do is we do our check for touch macro. And we pass in X and Y. Now if we weren't using callbacks, we could use this return value here and compare this with the ID of the various values here. But because we're using callbacks, it takes care of all of that for us. So we'll check for touch, and the only other thing we need to do is if there isn't a touch that's going on, then we just say no touch. Back in the display manager properties, we have a touch repeat rate, and you can see this is set to 10. So at the moment we have a delay in our loop of 100 milliseconds, and the repeat rate is set to 10, which means that it'll take 10 times, or 10 times 100 milliseconds, so 1 second, for a repeat touch to be made. So let's see if that's true. So if we run this, and if we click on the button, interesting. It looks like my orientation is not quite working with the simulation. Let's try and compare it to the hardware. So there it is, programming it in. Okay, so you can see as I press it, we have individual presses, and then if I press and hold, it auto presses every second. Lovely. So a little bit more advanced would be to have multiple scenes. So let's have a look at how we would manage that. So if we go to our Graphical Display Manager, we can increase the number of scenes here. Let's turn off my camera so you can see. So we can set our scene count to be 2. This creates a new scene here, and it should automatically, after a few seconds, create as a new scene, and there you can see it's used the default color. This is now called scene 1, so let's call this rename screen 1 menu. And in this, all I'm going to do is add a back button. let's just keep it super simple for now, to button underscore back. We'll change this to button underscore increment, and also change the text. And let's create a new button down here, and we'll call this button menu, and we'll change that text to menu. So you can obviously do things like, say they were scrambled a bit, you could do things like make them all the same width, distribute vertically, and align. There we go. So we've got increment, which is a button and uses the callback. We've got menu, which is a button and uses the callback. And here we have our return button, which is touchable and uses the callback. Let's just change this here to return, or let's call it home, and just pop it in the middle. Okay. So this is as easy as, let's just get rid of this. In our button manager, we would now have another decision for if handle is button menu. Then we simply, in our display manager, we just use draw scene, and we use scene index 1. Scene index 1 is our menu screen. And then we have another button which is if handle equals button back. Then again we return to our home screen, so we draw scene 0. Okay. So we can simulate this. So if I temporarily set my touch orientation to 1, this is obviously a bug I need to investigate. Let's bring on our 2D panel back. Let's run our simulation. So we can increment. Oh, we can't. Interesting. So it's still... Alright, let's also change this to 1. Does that resolve it? No, it doesn't. We also need to change this to 1. Okay, so now our buttons are in the right place and working. So that's a simulation problem for me to investigate. So we can increment, we can hold, we've got a menu, and then if we click home, we go back to our main screen. So that's all working lovely. So if we change this back again, so orientation 3, let's set our the software orientation. Just get rid of this for a second, and these. Right then, let's try compiling this to our hardware. Let's bring back our camera. So there, we finished compiling. It's now programming the hardware. And here we go. We've got our 4 rounded rectangles. We've got our increment button that has a press and hold. We have our menu button. It takes us to our second scene. We have our home button that takes us back to our first scene. And you can see that this is incredibly easy to put together in terms of we don't need to remember coordinates. We don't need to have bounding boxes for touch coordinates to be valid. It makes things very, very easy. Now we've just used the rounded rectangle, but there are other features. So let's just hide the web camera. So if we go back at display, look at display plugins. So we have a bitmap, so we can print images to say as backgrounds or as buttons. Now images would come from either an image stored inside the microcontroller flash, or it can come from something like an SD card. And then we have other primitive objects. So we have ellipses, we have hidden areas. So if you want to do things like have touch places but not have any visible sign, or have text inside a sort of transparent object, that's your hidden. You've got a simple 2D line. You've got rectangles, rounded rectangles. You've got a slider, which currently allows for either square or rounded horizontal, vertical sliders. And then we've got a text field. So we've got more planned to come here soon, but at the moment this is a very nice selection that gives you lots of possibilities. So anyway, I hope this has been useful. As always, I've been Ben Rowland, and many thanks for watching.